Welcome to the Partial Historians.
We explore all the details of ancient Rome.
Everything from political scandals, the love affairs, the battles waged, and when citizens turn against each other. I'm Dr Rad.
And I'm Dr G. We consider Rome as the Romans saw it, by reading different authors from the ancient past and comparing their stories.
Join us as we trace the journey of Rome from the founding of the city. Welcome to a special episode of The Partial Historians. I am one of your hosts, Dr Rad.
And I am Dr G.
And Dr G, we are joined by someone who is now, I think, a triple guest, which I don't think we've ever had before. We are joined by Dr Emma Southon, who is, without doubt, our top Drag Race fan to have on the podcast. But she also happens to be a top-notch historian and hilarious, so that's very handy for us. She is the author of a biography of Agrippina the Younger, as well as a book called A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and, most recently, A History of Rome in 21 Women, all of which you need to check out if you have not read them already. Emma is also the co-host of the podcast, History is Sexy. But we are here today to congratulate her on her latest book, which is Totally Chaotic History, Roman Britain Gets Rowdy. And in this collaboration, Emma gets together with podcaster and all-around famous author Greg Jenner and illustrator Rikin Parekh. So, Emma, welcome.
Hello. What a joy to be back. Am I really your first third person? That makes me feel special.
I think so.
I love feeling special.
You've come to the right place.
So we are so excited to talk about this book because it is very different, and we're going to explore some of those differences in a moment for you. But let's start with the general premise of the book, shall we? The book is about Roman Britain, and we actually learned a lot by reading this.
Right.
Because it is actually a children's book, I should point out to people.
It is technically for like 7 to 12-year-olds, but both Greg and I love history, and so we put in about as much as we learned. Everything that we learned that we found was interesting, we chucked in there, and we're very keen to make it a book that is proper history. So the premise is that Greg is an amateur historian who is telling the reader the story of whatever the period he's covering. So telling the story of Roman Britain. And then that's all in the present tense. And then he has expert interruptions from a professional historian or an expert in the field who in the past tense comes in and says, actually, Greg, we used to think that, but now we think, says, and we know this because we found X, Y, Z, and this is what the evidence is, and kind of then gives you the historiography of the period as well, and the how we know, what kind of things historians have had arguments about, what has shifted in our understanding of it, how we interpret the sources, and just both widening the subject as it's usually taught to children. So it's not just like decontextualized Roman Britain, which has no time period, which is what you very often get with kids' books. You just get the Romans, and as if there was no change in the entire period, or the Romans are in Britain for 500 years and there's just pretense that it's all the same and all the whole time. And also showing how we expanding what history is as it's taught to children. So it's not just giving them facts as though we know those facts, but what historians actually do, how we learn, how we change our minds, how we have big history fights all the time and have arguments about things, and how there isn't one right answer in history most of the time. There's a lot of wrong answers, but there's very rarely. There's also a lot of right answers. And so it sounds quite complicated, but because Greg is naturally hilarious, and because a lot of it is done through illustration and the way that the page is laid out, it means that there can be a lot going on the page, and you can learn a whole lot from what looks like just a really fun, silly joke.
You're making me feel a lot better about the fact that I learned a lot from reading this book.
Good. That's the aim, is that because I think that especially with, because I read the first, so this is a series that Greg is doing, and he's doing 4 initially. The first one was Totally Chaotic Egypt, and he sent me that like before it came out to say like this is what the thing's going to look like. And I learned so much from that. And like I haven't technically done Egypt since I was an undergraduate, but I still felt like I had, a basic grasp of it. But like there's a whole debate in there about why Egyptians mummified people and like what is the purpose of that. And I was like, oh my God, that never even thought about that as and it's just in a kid's book for 8-year-olds, and a complete shift in my understanding of why Egyptian culture mummified people. Is it preservation, or is it actually a deliberate transformation? Because if it's preservation, why are you taking the organs out? That's not preserving, is it? That's transforming the body.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So I also learned a lot, and the next one is the Stone Age, and I'm looking forward to learning stuff about that.
Okay, I'm ready to dig in. I'm going to have to acquire the whole series on the back of this.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It makes me feel terrified that all these children are going to grow up to be so incredibly educated.
They are. They're going to be smarter than us.
This is very
by the time
exciting.
they're 12, they're going to know so much.
Exactly. They're going to be like, excuse me, I think you'll find that there's historiographical debate about that.
Exactly. Actually, miss.
That's what we want.
Which I find terrifying because I'm a teacher, of course. So I'm actually going to encounter these children.
Yeah.
So thanks.
They'll be the best kids, though.
Yeah, we want that kind of smarts coming through. That's really
Yeah.
exciting.
So that's an amazing description of what the book is all about in sort of general terms. And it sort of made us realize that when we have looked at Roman Britain, it's been very much about Caesar, Claudius, and Boudica, the highlights, as I like to call them, which all happened in a very short period of time. So can you tell us a bit about some of the other chapters and what they specifically focus on?
So we have a chapter first at the beginning about the late Iron Age and like what is Britain like before Caesar gets there, basically.
Very important.
Yeah, because I think that everybody thinks that that Britain, like before Caesar got there, is basically what Caesar described, which is 8 men with mustaches and 200 cows and nothing else. So we've got a bit.
Sounds like a party.
Yeah. And then it effectively goes through kind of chronologically the history of the Roman occupation of Britain and Britain as part of the empire. So it does Caesar, and then the massive impacts that Caesar brings, because he makes Britain, or at least southern Britain, big chunks of it become client kingdoms of the Roman Empire. And so there's these relationships with Tiberius and Augustus that are very rarely written about in anywhere, to be honest, but they're all there. And then Claudius is kind of second invasion, his big invasion, and then the resistance period after that. So you've got about 100 years of people like Caratacus and the kind of ongoing attempts to remove the Romans. And then we really wanted it to not just focus on London. So we have a section on Wales. We've got sections on what's happening in the north of England, on how these places are kind of slowly absorbed into the empire in different ways, especially Wales, which takes like a really concerted effort to get it in. And then we go all the way through talking about both how unique Britain is in terms of how much of the army is there, how you get these kind of syncretistic gods that you find in Britain. So we've got a god swap game where you get to match your gods to your local gods.
That was one of my favorites.
Yeah. All of them just match with Mars, because apparently the British just really took to Mars and were like, we hear you said he's a god of war, but we've decided that he's the god of everything. So, and fashion, what are people wearing? What are people doing? Building fancy villas, building a town, because what Rome really brings is urbanization, and then so you get towns for the first time and cities, but also you get these huge villa estates that are like areas of agricultural production for export, which never existed before. And they're really unique, like the way they're built. And when everybody draws a Roman villa, they draw that kind of bracket shaped, classic Italian palace. But the ones in Britain are like corridors, and they're kind of weird. So we've got lots of archaeology and mosaics, and how you build your villa. So we originally wrote a grand designs thing for that. So it was going to be like someone's coming to visit, but then we were like, only 40-year-olds will get it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say.
This is for the parents.
Which 8-year-old is watching is it Kevin McLeod?
Like, it was really funny for us. And then we were like, no, 8-year-old knows what. So we did it as a catalogue instead. We were like, they'll get that. And then we did like the building your villa, building your town as a kind of Minecraft thing. So you get to did it as Constructor, the game, and then talked through all of the actually big history that happens in Britain at the end of the Roman Empire. So from like 200 to 400, there are like 3 emperors that are proclaimed in Britain, including Caracalla and Gaeta of Gladiator 2 fame now.
Absolutely. I was so excited to see the section on them.
There they are, hanging out.
I will tell you now, and I'm sorry that you're probably going to have to edit this out, but I spent the entire thing going, why is Gaeta the big one? Like, Gaeta...
Yeah, surely there's...
I really assumed...
Yeah, miscasting.
Yeah, like Gaeta is the big one, and the little one is Caracalla.
Don't tell Fiona too much. She hasn't seen it yet.
Oh, you've seen it. Okay.
We're actually going together to what we call gold class here, which basically is like super fancy cinema with like the recliners.
I want a Coliseum popcorn
Yeah.
bucket. That's what I'm after.
Yeah.
If I cannot get it here, and it breaks my heart. I'm not going to spoil anything else, but I'm just going to say Gaeta is the big one, and I genuinely spent a third of a movie with my mind blown.
Yeah, no, that is crazy to me.
Yeah, so Caracalla and Gaeta, Constantine the Great, he is crowned in Britain, and then Britain is called like a hotbed of usurpers because people keep rising up, taking chunks of the army and invading mainland Britain, basically. And then there's a lot that goes on there. Britain, I think, is very often considered to be like a massive backwater that Rome didn't care about at all. But you see hundreds of years of them desperately trying to keep Britain in the empire because it is very important as both a space for which is agriculturally producing enormously, and it is a place where people have loads of property and they want to keep it, and it is, they don't want to lose it as a space. And the period that Britain is the richest and when the most beautiful things are being built and when it's spending the most money on villas and mosaics and paintings and is the 3rd and 4th century. Like this period that we think of as a period of decline and misery is actually a period of kind of gold and luxury in Roman Britain. So we have all of that. And then we have the kind of final sad decline, I suppose, of Britain as the army just keeps leaving, and then no one has any money to travel across the sea anymore. So
this ferry system's getting very expensive. I don't know if I can put my army on boats.
And the Saxons got very, very good at piracy, so it became real expensive to keep sending stuff over. And so this kind of last hurrah of Roman Britain is how it ends with a bit of a whimper. And that famous letter from Honorius where he says, we wrote to Britain and said that they'll have to deal with themselves, which may or may not be about Britain. But yeah, so it hopefully gives like a very different perspective on Roman Britain, and in that it does the whole of it from the first contact in 150 BCE all the way through to kind of the final dregs of Roman culture in like 500s, and tells you everything that happened basically, and get a good idea of what living at any period under Roman occupation was like.
Oh, fantastic. So I like the fact that there's a chronology here. It's, as you say, it's not just a smattering of facts without any sort of contextual detail. So everybody gets to go on a journey through this whole few hundred years of Roman contact with the Britons. When you're thinking about your research and work on this book, was there anything in particular you were surprised to learn as you went through this process?
The kind of uniqueness of Romano-British culture, like archaeologically, because the archaeology of Roman Britain is not something that I had ever like looked at in huge detail, and I'd certainly never sat down and read all of the many British archaeological reports that I read. And because British archaeological reports basically publish every archaeology PhD that wants to be published, or that's on British archaeology, and it's brilliant. And as a result, you can read the tiny little niches that people do and see what they're looking at. And there are real uniquenesses to Roman British culture. Like they didn't, we used to call it Romanizing back in the day, but they didn't hurl themselves into being as Roman as possible and copy but they took what they wanted and absorbed it. But so they were like, okay, we'll do villas, but we're doing them in a way that we like. Like we'll do corners. No, a really funny thing is that there was a drought 2007, 2008 that for archaeologists was brilliant because all of the dried out fields meant that they could see with aerial photography loads of foundations that they wouldn't have been able to see. And so they could suddenly see loads of Roman and pre-Roman archaeological sites or like sites of locations of inhabitation where that they hadn't known existed before. And you can tell which ones are the pre-Roman because they're all round. And then the Romans come and put corners on everything.
Oh, those Romans. They love their lines. They love their angles.
They do.
Right angles, yeah.
They love a right angle.
They do. Can't
and
resist.
so it just really amused me to imagine like early Roman Britons being like, and they've got corners, you say, corner.
Well, there's something there about like a square peg and a round hole. I don't know.
Yeah. And you get these things, these really specific villas, and like they would build Roman temples, but they build them in a really specific way that doesn't look like a Roman temple. It's got like a circular bit in the middle. So they'll be like, okay, we'll do like 50-50 with you. And they would like all of the religious sites that appear, which don't appear until like relatively late, but they're like, we'll do votive offering. We get that, but we are only going to put it in water because water is our thing. So we're going to absorb it into our culture rather than absorbing ourselves into you, basically, which was fascinating to me. And at no point does Britain in general seem to have like wholeheartedly thrown itself into. You get the odd guy, like the guy who built Fishbourne Roman Palace, but mostly people are like, don't know how I feel about it.
No, guys, that might work
really
in
do
Italy,
like a circle.
but
Yeah.
here,
and they are still building roundhouses, and like you can see, like they'll get on board with things that are useful, like lamps and locks, but apart from that, they're a bit like. There is a real uniqueness, and like face pots as well as this thing that you only find in Roman Britain, which is urns for cremains, and they would bury the cremains in a pot with a little face on it. So they make these little face pots.
interesting.
Yeah, they are adorable. And I don't know if they're like the face of the person. Sometimes they have a little penis on them because they're Roman, so they'll just have like a penis
Naturally,
on
yeah.
Wouldn't want to miss an opportunity.
Yeah, but you find it in like you only find them in Britain and like a little bit in Northern Gaul, but they're just like these unique aspects of Roman Britain culture that I thought were really delightful. And every single one of them that I learned about was so charming because like certainly when I was in school, I grew up near Fishbourne Roman Palace, which is like the Roman palace, and it is the villa that everybody talks about. And it's ginormous. It's like 4 times the size of most villas. And it is so Roman. It's so square. It's got like the atrium. It's got the big wings that go round a bit of grass. And so for a long time, I was like, okay, so that's what a Roman villa is. But then when you look at what they all look like, they have a specific layout that the British designed themselves. And so it was eye-opening to see how the people for 400 years were like, okay, we can get along with some of this, but
I kind of like
it's like feels profoundly British to be like, okay.
The pragmatism of like, well, you say you do it that way, but we've always done it like this. So I think we're just going to keep doing it like this.
We're going to we'll incorporate the bits that we like, but otherwise we will be avoiding virtually all of it. And
We'll take the locks.
yeah,
Throw away the key.
exactly. We'll take this, but we're not getting on board with. We'll take the wine, but we're not getting on board with the garum.
Yeah. There's got to be a new Monty Python skit in there somewhere.
Yeah, there's a horrible history skit in there somewhere with the.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is obviously very apt given that Greg Jenner was involved in this.
He was, and you can tell he was the historical consultant for Horrible Histories for a long time, and he helped write the film, the Boudica film, and did a was kind of very responsible for a lot of horrible history stuff. So you can see that humor in there. He has the puns and wordplay, and we share a hilarity of just imagining how these things play out when people talk about, and then they cleared some land. We both find it really funny to imagine, like, how does that, like, there is a horrible history sketch of like somebody turning up at a guy's door and saying, "We're going to build a wall through here. Going to build a massive wall right the way across the island, and if you could just move your sheep out of the way."
I think that is something that that we also share. We delight in imagining these scenes of when people come up to the door of, you know, Cincinnatus whilst he's farming shirtless and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Giving Cato a call and he's fucking about with cabbages yet again.
Yeah. So obviously, as you sort of highlighted before, there are sometimes these sort of different ideas behind each chapter, the way you've laid it out and the sort of approach that you've taken. So when you sort of saw it all come together, which part ended up being your favorite?
What's my favorite? I find the Julius Caesar YouTube bit really funny. So we did Julius Caesar as like a manosphere YouTube bro who is trying to pass off his ludicrous turning up in Britain fundamentally unprepared and being chased out, and then constantly complaining that it doesn't matter how many hostages he takes, they just keep stabbing him in the back, like trying to pass it off as a brilliant victory. And like we imagined him kind of, what's that guy that just fought?
Oh, the guy that just fought Mike Tyson.
The boxer guy. Yes.
I can't remember his name.
What's his name?
But isn't he fundamentally a YouTuber?
Yeah, he is. So basically we imagined him as one of those YouTubers who's like always doing stunts or like a kind of Mr. Beastie type bro guy who just wants to impress everybody with like the massive stunts that he's doing. And then we had like his description of Britain. We ended up doing it as like a Q&A while he's trapped in, because he can't go out because the weather's so bad and it's destroyed all of his ships. That genuinely happened. So he got trapped on the island because all his ships got destroyed in a storm. So like he's got nothing to do, so he can do an AMA. Like, and then he'll describe Britain, and that's how we'll have like his description of what Britain is like. And yeah, that ended up. And when we were recording the audio book, Greg was doing voices, doing his YouTuber voice, and it took a while to get through that because it was just made us both really laugh. That one, I really like that chapter. I think it's really funny.
It's a good one. Julius Caesar, what a man, what a time.
I know, what a man, what a guy.
And maybe this will help some people, you know, young people come to a better sense of what he might have really been like, you know.
Yeah.
He spends a lot of time talking about himself, that's for sure.
In the third person, we did let him say I. We should have. We thought they might be a bit far if we had him saying Caesar has been to Britain. It just sounds ridiculous.
Well, it would have served him right in some respects, but I can appreciate the change.
Yeah, but yeah, it still tickles me to imagine him on YouTube.
Definitely. He'd have quite a following, I can only imagine.
He really would. He'd have a podcast. He'd have a following. He'd be doing massive things and filming them. Yeah, it would be ridiculous.
So I like the fact that this is a new kind of avenue, if you like, for your work as a way, because not only is this a co-authorship situation, but there's also an illustrator involved, and you've talked a little bit about how the layout of the page is doing a lot of the work in sort of helping create the argumentative structures and to point people in particular directions. I'm wondering if you can take us a little bit through that process. What was it like coming together to collaborate on that visual as well as the written?
Fun. I'm not a visual thinker, so what the page looked like was probably the bit that I was least involved in. We had as we were going through, so what we did was we went through and put together like a chronology of what we thought the chapter should be and what we wanted to include and how to break it up. And then we went through and sat on Zoom for hours and like chapter by chapter we're like, what's the funniest way to do this chapter? And then we wrote them. So I would do the research and then send loads of research to Greg, and he would write it and send it back to me. And then I would edit it and fiddle about with it and send it back to him. And then we would go back and forth. And then we basically sent a giant Word document, and would come up with kind of ideas of things that we would think were funny for it to look like. But we basically then sent the text to Rikin, and then he drew what he thought were funny, basically versions about. Greg thinks of jokes really easily, like visual jokes, because of his work in TV. So sometimes he would put in a like, would it be funny to have, like, when I found, archaeologists have found cow skulls with Roman bullets in them, because the Roman army would use cows as target practice, or were just shooting cows for fun, which is bizarre. And so he was like, we have to have a picture of we have to have a picture of that. Or he would think of a caption, and then we would send that to Rikin. And then Rikin just drew loads. And part of it is of what the page looks like is done by the editors, because it has to fit onto a certain amount of pages, essentially. And so we would lose text in order to keep a picture, or lose a picture in order to keep text. And so it went through probably 10 or 12 different iterations of what the page is going to look like. If we have this image here, the joke is before, like the visual joke is before the paragraph, so we're going to have to shift it round. But if we do that, then it's going to push the visual joke onto the next page, so we're going to have to cut out like 13 words of this paragraph so that it will all fit on this one page. And it's a very kind of careful, I have a lot more appreciation for kids' books and illustrated books now, of how much work goes in, like page by page, to making sure that you don't end up with a big bit of blank space. You don't end up with especially because we've got like 3 layers of text. We've got the Greg's text, and then the interruptions, and some of them are interruptions and some of them are definitions. So where I've underlined something and then defined it, and keeping that all on the one page, so that the jokes run in the right order and that the paragraph doesn't ruin the visual joke and the visual joke doesn't come completely out of context, is quite an undertaking. And I now have a lot of respect for children's books editors who are having to balance this, like, very visually, that I did not have before. I did not appreciate them as much as I should have. So it is quite a process. And sometimes I sent Rikin a lot of visual references so that everything would be as accurate as possible. So when we have at the beginning, you start seeing things like cosmetic mixers, cosmetic sets like appear in southern Britain, I was like, we should totally, like, we're gonna have to, we can't be having like, I don't want you to be having like a mirror and a brush. I want it to be a Roman cosmetic set. It doesn't look like what you consider to be a cosmetic set. It looks like a pestle and mortar that's tiny. But he was great at asking for more. What does this look like? What does an actual pot look like? Like one of the original pots he drew, I was like, no, that's a Greek pot. Sorry. I love you. But that, like, there's a difference between a Greek pot and a Roman pot. And you've drawn a Greek pot and I need you to draw me a Roman, like the handles are smaller, the neck is different. And so we did go kind of back and forth a few on that. But he really wanted to be accurate as well. So I would send him like big PDFs full of images of often drawings of things from BAR reports, and he would make them funny. God bless him.
That is an art, I think, being able to take, archaeological drawings and turn them into something hilarious as well as informative at the same time.
And we really did our best to be like, what's the difference between a Roman chariot and a like Iceni chariot? Like, do we know? What can we tell? How do we make them look different? What's the difference between a Greek pot and a Roman? So we're not misleading people. And
yeah, well, I mean, and I think that you've actually highlighted something which is also a bit of a departure for you, which is that you have most definitely been writing for adults in your previous books.
I have.
All the murder,
all the murder, all the swearing, all the
exactly,
development jokes. Not great.
So what was it like having to write for children?
I was very lucky that I was with Greg. So he did the first draft of everything.
Right.
And he obviously has been writing for kids for a very long time. And he has other kids' books that he has written This was his third or fourth one, and he did a podcast series for kids during the lockdown called Homeschool History. Like, he knows how to make children laugh, and he has a kid, and he's not afraid of them like I am. So he did the first pass basically of everything, and then I just went through and was either like, I understand the sentence, or just kind of tweaked things. So it felt like a kind of apprenticeship in a way of seeing Greg do his thing. And I would give him like quite dense 15-20 page research articles that I had written up, or like lists of things, all the things I thought would be interesting for this chapter. And he would pare those down into 2,000 words that contained a ton of jokes for kids and some references to like robot hamsters or whatever. And I'm like, it is a real work of genius to be able to do this and make it like snappy and funny. And then we would just edit it down together until it got kind of littler and littler. And the only bit that I wrote by myself which was by the time we had got like quite a few chapters in, was the Mythbuster part on Hadrian's Wall. So I'd seen him write like 6 or 7 chapters by that point. So I felt like I could have a go. And then he edited it into something better. But it's a real art form to talk to kids and entertain them without patronizing them and without being like Krusty the Clown or something.
Yeah.
It was, or doing what I do to children in real life, which is to talk to them like they're just adults but smaller. Hello, Charles. How was your day at work?
Let's please talk about the difference between Roman and Greek pots. It's very important that you understand the subtle differences.
I do. As an example of how I usually am with children, I was talking to my nephew quite recently. It was his 21st birthday. And I took him out for dinner and we were out, and he said, "Do you remember, Auntie Emma, when I was about 6 and you taught me what genocide was?" I was like, yes.
That is exactly the kind of thing that I would do.
I mean, if it comes up in conversation and it's the right time to learn the information,
In my defense, he was in a school that was very progressive, and they had decided to name all of their classes after countries. Like, each year group was a continent and each class was a country. The year before, he had been in hedgehog class, and this year I asked him what class he was in, and he said Cambodia.
Oh God.
Well, yeah. That makes total sense that you would instantly go there.
And after some questioning, we obviously got round to Cambodian history.
Fair enough.
And he considers it a very formative part of his, like, he's now very politically engaged and he's a journalist, so I feel like I did a good job, but still at the same time.
Yeah. No, look, I think that's one of the things, that is one of the things I find when you're actually talking to a small child, because I also have a couple of nephews who are toddlers at the moment. And I find that it's one of those things where I'll just be talking to them normally, just as I'm like, bustling around, and I'll just say something. And then all of a sudden, as the words leave my mouth, I'm like, oh no, that's going to lead to more questions. And I don't know what their parents want me to say about this. And I literally did that the other day, where I was talking about how I was a step parent. And then I was like, oh no, that's going to lead to questions about what does that involve? And so I had to go through the whole thing of, look, so those people I call my children? Yeah, they weren't actually ever inside of me. Oh, crap, that's going to lead to even more questions.
Where do children come from?
Yeah, and I think we ended up finishing the conversation with him concluding that to have a step parent means that you have 3 mothers. And I was like, yep, you know what, let's just leave it with that. Yep, yeah, that's a good conclusion.
You know what, that's fine. Yeah.
We can clear that up
There's
later.
worse things that could come out that. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, so I am terrible at explaining things to really small children.
Yeah, they're very challenging. That's why they can see right through you. And this is the thing with writing for kids and talking to kids, really. Like, they know if you're like trying to bullshit them, and they don't have time for any kind of patronizing them or pretending like and so you have to be enthusiastic and you have to take them seriously. And which is good, because that's what I like to do. I take everything. Well, that's not true. I don't take everything seriously, but I do take history seriously.
I think
seriously underneath, hilarious on the top.
Yeah. Exactly. And I wouldn't have done a book for children if it had been anything other than what Greg does, which is to teach kids history, not just teach them history facts, like, or history stories, but teach them what history is and what historians do, and that history is largely arguing and interpretation. It's not just like a static series of stories or facts or myths. It is a kind of constantly evolving discipline. And he takes that very seriously indeed, and then does robot hamster jokes.
This actually leads me into something that I did want to ask you about, because this book has things like the chaos ratings in it as you go through. And you know, this is obviously a really great mechanism, I think, for giving us sort of a little bit of a foreshadowing of what is to come, or indicating just how complex the thing that is about to be discussed is going to be. And I'm wondering about how like a feature like that may have evolved during the discussion process.
Yeah, because that's the historiographical bit, I think. Yeah.
Because this is, so Greg's original like pitch for this was that he will be the guy who is living through it, essentially. Like, he's in present tense and he is living through it. And sometimes you never know what's coming next, and sometimes what comes next is really chaotic, and like in the moment you have no clue what's happening, and the historian can come in and say, oh, XYZ is what is occurring. But like, so you have this period at the end, which is I think when the chaos meter goes to totally chaotic, when Britain is like in 3 separate empires technically in about a 20-year period. So the Gallic Empire splits away from the Roman Empire in the 3rd century, and then Aurelian brings it back in, and then it splits off into a tiny British Empire, which consists of Britain.
We're all by ourselves again, guys.
Yeah. For like 10 years, it's the British Empire. And then it's back into the Roman Empire again. And so we had that as a newsreader who's like constantly being like, and then this guy's been murdered, and then this guy's been murdered. There's constantly coins like appearing, and who the hell is this guy? And so his feeling is that it, like, sometimes it's going to feel like you don't know what's going to happen. Like, who's going to be the emperor when you wake up tomorrow? What empire am I in when I wake up tomorrow? Like, sometimes when you're living day to day, it feels totally chaotic, and like you don't know how anything is going to survive. But you can then be a historian and look back and say, the forces. And Aurelian is going to come and save everybody, and it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, don't worry, guys.
And so the chaos meter is basically how the person at the time would be feeling if they were living through this. Are they feeling like they're in a good, chill, peaceful time where everything is delightful and it's the end of history? Or are they living in interesting historical times and they feel like they don't know what their world is going to look like tomorrow, and they're burying their gold because they're worried that someone's going to come and rob them?
Yeah, fair enough.
I was really impressed by all those additional elements because, as I say, I think that's where the historiography comes in, with the accuracy alerts, the myth busting. You know, it was so layered, as you say. I was like, whoa, there's like so much historiography going on this page, and it's a children's book. And I think, without a doubt, this isn't a question, I'm just saying this. Without a doubt, my favourite part was the historian head-to-head over Boudica, mostly because of the illustration of you and Greg fighting each other with books.
A genuinely delightful. And, you know, and that is an argument that, for some reason, I keep trying to avoid Boudica, but I come back to her constantly.
Hard to avoid.
And I know, I've accidentally written 2 books that she's in, and like, there are so many different interpretations of her, and so many, like, there, you know, you can talk to French archaeologists who argue that she never existed. You can talk to like really intense patriots who are like, she was a woman, and like the Tacitus story is exactly what happened to her, and that is precisely it. I kind of like to sit in the middle, and I think that Tacitus is telling a very specific fictionalized mythic story about her, and that it bears almost no resemblance to the Dio version of her. And that these are, you know, she's a real woman told as a literary device. But then you have, you know, there's is it Manda Scott, who is like, no, she was Welsh, and Boudica actually means Vodica, and then it means victory, and like there's so many different ways of understanding her and of interpreting her, but all we have really is 2 guys who know something about her and are writing about her for a very specific political audience. And that kind of arguing about her, that's what history is, especially ancient history. And you know this, when you're dealing with Roman texts and you've got nothing else to you've got nothing else to work with. It's just arguing over two guys and how much you want to believe those two guys were telling the truth. And if they were both telling the truth, then why are their stories so different?
Yeah, look, as two people who base their entire podcast basically on Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus for a long time, and we generally do often get to the point where I end up sort of saying at the end of the episode, so wait, maybe none of this ever actually happened? And Peter's like, whoa.
I mean, something happened. And
yeah,
like, but do we have any idea what it was?
I'm like, have we just proven that none of this ever happened?
Rome appeared fully formed in 27 BCE with Augustus.
Yeah, exactly.
And before that, we can't possibly know anything.
We don't know anything about it before that. No.
Yeah. Look, I think it is amazing how much you guys have been able to show, as you say, what history actually is, which is all these different perspectives, all this problematic evidence. It is amazing that you have been able to delve into all of these issues and cover the entire history of Britain all in one book.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
In like 25,000 words. It's
I have something to learn. So tell us, if people are really keen to dive right in, and we mean physically dive in, are there any places in Britain that you would recommend going?
So there are a bunch of villas. So I honestly do think that Fishbourne is brilliant. It is very much it's like an early Roman villa. It's in Sussex, and it's like the most Roman of all the Roman villas, but it is amazing, and it is like a genuine delight to see. Chedworth is also great, and that's much more of a, what's the word, like British one, but it
round
is
corners. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a corridor, but it's also it has great like mosaics, and it's a great site to go to. The British Museum has all the cool stuff, so you can't say no to the British Museum, really. It does have all the best stuff. But the great thing about Britain is that you can come one day. Me and my husband say we're going to get an English heritage membership and just spend a year like driving around Britain looking at all the English heritage stuff. Because there's so much in the way of, in every town there's something, almost every town there's something that is Roman. And then like my dad lives in Dover, and they have a fort that's under a car park that you can go to.
Classic.
Yeah.
Come to our car park fort.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And you can go to Dover
You can
Castle.
get in, but can you get out? Yeah.
It costs you £10.50 to get out. And Dover Castle has a Roman lighthouse. So it's still standing.
Nice.
It's like next to a 12th century church, but it's this Roman lighthouse that you can go to, and virtually anywhere that you go. And quite often, because we wanted to do a whole chapter on the rediscovery of Roman Britain, because Roman Britain was not appreciated particularly until like the 18th century, when they redug up Bath in order to make it kind of Georgian spa destination, and we discovered all of the stuff in Bath, and all of the stuff there, you can see the Roman stuff, but a lot of it is still buried, and a lot of the stuff that they say is Roman is actually Victorian, but it's like pseudo neoclassical. It's still gorgeous, it's worth going to, and just be aware that it's not all that. But so much of it was not appreciated, and you get all of these stories of like 17th century 16th century farmers digging up mosaics and then just chucking them in the bin.
Oh no.
Oh, lordy lord.
Or there was one story that was like from 1840 something of a farmer ploughing up a mosaic, and then it being in the papers and loads of people coming to see them, and then everyone just taking some of it home, and it kind of makes you feel a bit sick. But
and this is my chunk.
How much stuff? I mean, when you combine that with all the stories of early archaeologists at places like Pompeii and Herculaneum, being like, that's not important, tossing it out. Give me the good stuff. You're just like, oh my God, how much of this stuff that we complain we don't have enough of has actually ended up in the bin?
Yeah. But since then, it's got a bit better. But now virtually every town in Britain has something, and it will have a mosaic or something cool and Roman in their like village British Museum, and which is kind of delightful to see how much of it there is just everywhere, and not just the monumental stuff that you get if you go. Like there's no arches, there's no big buildings particularly. There's just lots of little things. I will do one shout out for the Mithraeum in London, actually, if you're in London, which is in the bottom of the
Yes.
Bloomberg building. But they have they have the oldest writing tablets that have been found in Western Europe, which are from like 100 CE, that were all found in the Thames. And they're all business tablets, so they're well boring, but they're delightful to see. But then what they've done with the Mithraeum, with these kind of light show and holograms and this recreation of Mithraic worship, is really cool to see.
That sounds like a delight.
Yes.
It does indeed.
yeah.
I've never been, actually, even though I've been to London several times. I didn't know it was there the last time I was
Yeah,
there.
you have to like go
Wow.
to the business district and then like go into the bottom of a building that really feels like you shouldn't be in. There's all Bloomberg
Like,
people.
how did-
But yeah, but
Yeah,
it's
like, wait a
free
minute.
and it is like an hour, and you get to see, and they've got these kind of displays of all of the stuff that they found. Their archaeological reports are great as well, actually. But yeah, there's just so much stuff. You can do the army, you can go up and see all the forts in the north, and you can go and see Hadrian's Wall and walk along it, and you can go to Vindolanda, although the good tablets are in the British Museum. But
Fair warning. Fair warning.
yeah,
Yeah.
but they do have lots of
Start at the British
shoes.
Museum, then work your way up.
Yeah, pretty much. Start at the bottom, work your
Yeah.
way up, drive around. There is
Yeah.
a great book actually about driving around Rome and Britain by Charlotte Higgins.
Ooh,
Uh,
okay.
And she drove around, it's a few years old now. She drove around Britain and went to loads and loads of different Roman sites, and like really explored the impact that Rome left on the British landscape that you can still see. So I would recommend that book.
Fantastic. All right. Well, to wrap this up, because this has been a fabulous conversation, as always, we hear that there might be exciting new upcoming projects in your life.
There are.
And we're wondering if you can tell us hints and tips.
I
little bit more.
can. So the book that I'm writing at the moment is very definitely for adults, and is a kind of big cultural history of slavery in the Roman Empire, and all of the ways that slavery was embedded into the empire and supported it and made it possible for the empire to exist, basically, which I'm trying not to make depressing, largely by focusing on people, and as many people as I can that to experience slavery in one way or another, which is everybody in the empire. Like there's not one single person in the whole Roman Empire who experienced a day without coming into contact with slavery in some way. Either by owning them, being one, or dealing with an enslaved person. So that's what I'm writing at the moment. And then I have a 2-book deal now, so there's a minimum of 2 books coming. So the next one after that is going to be about the Palatine, and a history of the Palatine complex through the emperors who lived there, how it grew, what was there, what's going on, who are these guys. It takes up like 2 miles of Rome. It takes up like nearly a quarter of the city in its original walls. It's enormous, and it's full of people, and yeah, what's going on up there and how it changes, and everybody from the guy who is in charge of import taxes from Alexandria to the guy whose job is to be a sexy human pet.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. You can go up that hill, but you don't know what anybody will ask you to do once you get to the top of the mountain.
You do not.
that's
And
right.
it could be very boring, or it's almost certainly going to be very boring, but it might also be very weird.
Amazing. Both of those projects actually sound really incredible and important, actually, because I think for readers who are interested in Rome but haven't had the opportunity to really study it in depth, the extent to which slavery shapes Rome and how it operates is massive, and it needs to be better understood, I think. Yeah.
And when I talk to people, when I tell people who are not Roman historians that this is what I'm doing, 99% of the time the response is, oh, I hear slavery in Rome was actually fine. Like everybody was freed, and it was basically like being a serf. And you have to be like, no.
Actually, pretty terrible.
It is.
Slavery is just generally not a good idea
it
ever.
is still very much slavery. So
Yes.
Yeah. Like, just because it's better than some forms of Greek slavery doesn't mean that people are like, oh, yeah, it's totally cool. I'll totally do that.
Just because it doesn't have a philosophy behind it doesn't mean that it isn't still slavery.
Yeah. Yeah.
So part of it is going to be overcoming the fact that people think that Roman slavery is not really slavery, or they don't think it's chattel slavery, or or they're just really focused on one specific form of domestic slavery, like that you are the secretary of Cicero, and therefore you have a certain amount of power, forgetting all of the people in the fields and the mines and the fullers and the people doing the monstrous jobs that no one will take, is being paid to do. They're doing it forever.
You've got to think of that opening of Spartacus, because as much as there is zero evidence that that's what Spartacus originally did, the film does show him working a pretty terrible job at first.
And there's a lot of people talking about like mining and field work and chain gangs and, and how terrible it was. But that's the next project, which is not for kids. Yeah.
No. Are you sure? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe. All right. They just really depress some children.
Yeah. Well, that is very exciting. We will be looking forward to hopefully chatting to you again when that is finished. But thank you so much for talking to us today. As usual, we have not only did we learn a lot from the book, but we learned a lot about the process of producing a book like this. And I definitely would encourage actually adults to read it as well as get it for your kids, because I think you'll find it's a genuinely delightful read.
Yeah, I think that everybody will learn a lot from it. There are not that many books on Roman Britain for adults or for anybody that do tell you all about it. And this is a good starting point, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for telling us more about this book. So for people who are listening at home or wherever you are out and about, the book is called Totally Chaotic History, Roman Britain Gets Rowdy, with an exclamation mark. So get the excitement pumping.
Yes.
Get into some historiography. Go and enjoy the whole swath of Roman British history.
Yeah, and it is available in ebook as well as print and audiobook from the sounds of it.
Yeah, my first audiobook reading experience, I do a voice. I do a good couple of amusing voices. So if you want to hear me do my first foray into voice acting.
How exciting.
Won't stop there.
Yeah.
I look forward to hearing what you think Agrippina the Younger sounded like.
Oh, God.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we will definitely be talking to you hopefully shortly about slavery.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this special episode of The Partial Historians. You can find our sources, sound credits, and an automated transcript in our show notes at www.partialhistorians.com. Our music is by Bettina Joy de Guzman. You too can support our show and help us to produce more fascinating content about the ancient world by becoming a Patreon. In return, you receive exclusive early access to our special episodes, just like this one. However, if you lost all your money betting on a chariot race, please just tell someone about the show or give us a 5-star review. Until next time, we are yours in ancient Rome.